Jedi Survivor released 9 minutes of new gameplay, and I wanted to talk about the good, the bad, and the hopeful. If you haven't seen the footage yet, many people are weighing in, talking about the potential problems or things that they're seeing, and IGN got their hands on this footage, so we are going to be looping this video periodically throughout the content. And the reason I want to go through the good, the bad, and the hopeful is because I do have hopes for this game, especially once we learned about the 5 stances. That sounded sort of similar to Ghost of Tsushima, and as somebody who basically got into FromSoft games because of Jedi Fallen Order, I really have a lot of high hopes for Jedi Survivor. So let's just start with the good, because I do think there are a lot of good things in this footage. First and foremost, I think it's noticeably larger in scope. There's much larger areas. You can even see he's kind of zooming in here. There's longer, further graphical draw distances. Likely that's something they can do now that it's no longer on old gen consoles. And it gives the game, I think, a bigger and more epic feel. I think that's necessary in a sequel to, make it definitely feel as if something has sort of leveled up with respect to scope and reach and how far things are out in the distance. Graphically, I think it is also clearly upgraded with respect to detail, shadows, and lighting. There's definitely more sort of emphasis on that in some of the sequences and some of the scenes right here, especially as he kind of comes out of the shadows and then back into the shadows. You can really get the sense that they've increased those details, and I think that is something that is good, and I think it is worth noticing. Now, Cal's movement and his movesets have been upgraded since the previous game. I don't think that is in dispute. There are some issues, I think, with some of the animations and some of his movement. I'll get to that in a moment, but I do think since the previous game, there is a greater sense that he sort of feels faster. His attacks and his pushes and his swings feel heavier. It's almost as if he feels more intentional with the combat. Force pushes were always fun in the previous game, and so I think that is something that I noticed after my experience with Jedi Fallen Order. I played it quite a bit. I did notice that in this footage. Now, the different stances, I actually do think are one of the standout pieces of this footage. They really do feel more unique as well as contextually useful. It seems like there's different times where you're going to use one stance over another. I think it's going to be fun to test out which stances are best for which enemies, unlike Ghost of Tsushima, where they basically just tell you this stance is for people with spears and this stance is for guys with sword and shields. They're not going to tell you that in Jedi Survivor, so there is going to be some trial and error. Do you use dual saber? Do you use, twin blade saber like Darth Maul? Do you use the heavy guard, the guard stance? So I think that's going to be really fun testing those out. And there is a QTE execution, sort of a quick time event execution against this guy that I actually think feels a little bit more natural and fluid than the last game. I think the way he sort of goes into it is pretty cool. That was one of my favorite things in the first game, was sort of having those moments where you pull off a really dope move and then you sort of get rid of somebody who's really, really strong. And this guy's obviously got his posture pretty much all the way broken in health, and he kind of jumps on his back. And I like that. I thought that was very fluid. I like the way that he sort of moved into that. Climbing feels faster, which is nice. There were elements from the last game where times where it kind of felt like it took a long time to get to certain areas. It feels like some of our previous game strength is still present, and I think that's really important. You really get a glimpse here at the climbing and why it does have that increased speed. There's also a fluidity when he's sort of switching stances. I think that's a huge plus. You wouldn't want that to feel clunky. That is something that I really, really liked in Ghost of Tsushima. Right there, he transitions to, the kind of the twin blade very, very quickly. And when he puts away one of the sabers or decides to go to the twin blade, it's really, really cool. He just sort of attaches it at his hip. I really, really like that. Little touches like that I think are very, very nice. Outfits and discoverable customization in the game are way better than the ponchos. He finds a chest in this footage and there's a really cool leather jacket. I definitely think first game, that was one of the criticisms, was all the secrets, all the chests are basically just customization, and I think the ponchos got old. Even my kids, when they were playing the game, my son was like, ugh, he made me take the poncho off the character. He didn't want to run around with the poncho on. So basically, even though it didn't wow me, I do think it definitely makes me want to get on the sticks and try all the new stuff that they showed off. So that's all the good. Now let's talk about the bad, because I do think there are some bad things to the combat and to the movement. You can kind of see here, one of the things I think is Cal moves a little bit like a lumbering drunk. It's kind of awkward. It's like his boots are too heavy. I'm not really sure why that is. I'm not quite sure what they're going for. Is he supposed to look tougher? Is he supposed to look more like a confident, swaggering outlaw? I'm not really sure. Some of his movement when he's running, it's fine, but when he's kind of lumbering around or going up hills, again, it just looks like he's wearing like molten lead boots that are too heavy for his feet. Now, combat, I do still think has a clunky feel to it. Now, that could be the player's lack of familiarity and their lack of finesse in a vertical slice. I experienced this in the Forspoken demo when they sort of suddenly throw you into the late game of a video game, and you have all these abilities that you're unfamiliar with, right? You didn't like slowly level up and unlock all these different things. You're just sort of thrown to the wolves. Like, that may have led the player to play kind of clunky, and I do think that's something to consider. I do think the combat kind of looked like it lacked that polish and that tightness that I was hoping for. Some of the animations and the movements, I think, feel a bit stiff, like the previous game. There are moments in Jedi Fallen Order and in this footage it just feels kind of stiff. It's like he won't move with this freedom. And that's weird because sometimes he really does move with a lot of fluidity and freedom. Now, this could be a deliberate choice. It could be sort of endemic to the engine. It also could just be that they imported different models, animations, and movesets, and that likely then led to them sort of having it feel similar to Jedi Fallen Order, so maybe that's why. Here is that bomber jacket. I obviously think that's way cooler than virtually any of the cosmetics that we got in the first game. Now, I really, really wanted combat to have more of a very tight Ghost of Tsushima or Sekiro type feel with the stances. Now, I had a lot of people get on my case on my one video when I said, hey, I would love for this game to be more like Sekiro, make it really challenging, make it really difficult. And people were like, no, we don't want that. If you want to play a FromSoft game, go play a FromSoft game. But you have to remember, a game like this has difficulty settings, like difficulty settings. You can turn things down, you can turn things up, you can tweak it to your liking. And I would have just liked to have seen the use of those 5 stances in a way that would have really required that moment-to-moment finesse, that tightness, those parries. Now, again, it is still possible that that's going to be something you can do with playstyle choices. Maybe you can do build options. This gameplay showcase, I think, arguably is actually pretty sloppy. And again, that could be the person playing. So lastly, I want to talk about why I am hopeful. First and foremost, this sequence here near the end of the footage, it seems like the person playing got quite a bit better. We get to see dual saber. We get to see him convert it to the twin saber stance sort of fluidly, and he's taking people out a lot more efficiently. And this is when I think things start to look a little bit better. It's a shame that the whole video isn't like this. Some of the earlier footage felt a little clumsy. But I am hopeful. I think this showcase leaves me hopeful that there is a lot more to show beyond this sort of clumsy, clunky 9-minute video. We haven't seen boss fights, okay? We haven't seen any of the big mini boss fights either. Sometimes there's like mini boss fights along the way. Then there's like the named boss fights, right? We haven't seen any tough fights. We have definitely, I don't think, seen a good player control Cal, somebody who's really put the effort and the time in and has really upgraded their character and gotten super familiar with all of the movesets and all of the abilities. I think the story also promises to be a very excellent addition to the great story from the first game. I think Jedi Fallen Order is arguably one of the better Star Wars stories that are available out there. I think it really, really brings great things to the table. I think they did really cool things with characters that we're familiar with and then characters that were brand new, and I think that was something that I really appreciated. Even if this is just marginally improving on the first game, I think that's a huge win for fans because the first game was so good. This game doesn't have to do much to be a good game. I was hoping for a great game. We will obviously have to wait to see more footage. While I wanted to see clearer differences in the combat, I didn't really see much of that. I saw upgrades and improvements, but not like a clear difference in combat. I think they do want to stay loyal to what everybody enjoyed in the first game. And I understand that. I know that's a tough sort of balancing act. You want to innovate, you want to add, you want to upgrade, but you don't want to do it to the point that the game doesn't feel like a continuation of the first game. So my conclusion, okay, while nothing about this showcase really screams next gen, since, they are leaving old gen behind, I wasn't really looking for mind-blowing graphics. So I'm not necessarily too concerned over the fact that the graphics are good, but we're not seeing anything in this footage that is like, oh wow, that's a really crazy, awesome next-gen game. I think that's going to be a continued theme for lots of games coming out. I think one of the reasons for that is games like this with wide open spaces and lots of enemies and a lot going on are not going to be able to give you crazy high fidelity next gen graphics. They're just going to have to turn some of that stuff down to give you really good and consistent performance. Now, I am sure this will lead to fans sort of becoming split on whether or not this showcase is showing us that, hey, this was worthy of leaving behind old gen. We're looking at a game that really is going to benefit from leaving behind old gen. You may primarily just get larger areas. The areas seem bigger, more open. There's more going on. Also consider the fact that there are mounts and completely new mechanics. Those are things that might not have been possible if they stayed on old gen. That is going to obviously remain to be seen. I think sometimes people get really caught up in, well, if we leave behind old gen, I need to be able to see like sweat beads on Cal's face and everything needs to look pristine and photorealistic. I think we need to be, ironically, we need to be realistic in our expectations of what we're going to see from games like this, especially when they're setting you up in environments and areas where there is wide open spaces. It's a little bit easier to contain things in some of the more smaller games that might be more linear. You also have to consider not every game is going to strive for photorealism. You're going to get some of that just in certain sequences. You'll see things like ice and water that look really nice, but then generally speaking, the rest of the game is still going to feel true to form. It's still going to be in the same art style as the previous game. I also think having somebody, hold two lightsabers in a wide variety of ways, I think it makes it tough given how you have to kind of hold lightsabers away from your body. So I do think it leads to some certain stances and some certain movements, like even right there. There's just an awkwardness, but again, I think it's awkward to create character animations around laser swords that if you're not really careful, you're going to chop a limb off, right? They have to make him move in a way that's somewhat believable and not like accidentally constantly cutting off his arms and his legs, and we just, I guess, ignore the fact that his lightsaber's constantly poking him, okay? In light of how clumsy and awkward the gameplay turned out, if I was in charge, I would stop sending vertical slices to companies if they're going to struggle to make the gameplay look good, right? I'm not faulting somebody if they're unfamiliar with the game. There's this litany of abilities. There's all these new things you can do. It's new controls, maybe. You might feel a little bit awkward. So I'm not trying to be super harsh to whoever it was that played this, but again, if I was in charge, I would stop doing this. This isn't the first time I've watched gameplay for a game and thought, who on earth is playing? They seem to be really having a hard time, and it's not a great showcase for your game. I think you have to consider that because it's going to influence what people think about your game. They're going to look at the gameplay footage and think, that looked kind of dumpy and clumsy and silly. That didn't look very fun or intense, okay? All in all, it's a decent showcase, and I'm looking forward to the game, and I think for the most part, this is going to be a wonderful continuation of the Jedi Fallen Order story that many people fell in love with. I really hope it leads to potentially putting Cal in some of the TV shows and giving him the opportunity to grow as a character, even though they kind of make him lumber around here in some clumsy ways. Some people might say that I'm nitpicking, but I tend to be more observant and a little bit more critical, and my eye gets more critical when it's something that I care about. If this was just some brand new game and it wasn't Star Wars, I really wouldn't care. I'd be like, it looks like a pretty good action-adventure game. I love Star Wars, and I love Jedi Fallen Order, so I was really wanting to see really big improvements and giant leaps for the finesse and the tightness of the combat, and I hope future gameplay showcases can really put that on display. I don't think we got the best showing of all of the stances. We really only got 3. We got the primary single saber, 2 sabers, and then the twin saber. I don't think that is anything special, given a lot of that's sort of similar to stuff that we did in the first game. So maybe we'll get some more showcases, given that it was delayed a little bit, like 6 weeks. Not a major delay. Maybe they're just trying to get some polish in there. So I'd love to know what you think in the comments below. These videos usually redirect to me hanging out with members and discussing it, so make sure you are a member on the channel if you want to be a part of those members-only behind-the-scenes discussions. As always, hit subscribe, hit the bell button, hit the like button, and I'll see you in the next video.